Hey, Joe.
Hey, Micah, I'm honored to be here with the 1996 Model UN representative of the great country of France. And
That
fortuitously
was the peak of
here,
my career. Everything's been downhill since then.
I'm glad to have you here because we wanted to talk a little bit about the startup geography in the post COVID 19 landscape. And so you've been tweeting a lot about this lately, most notably tweeting that the exurbs aren't looking so X anymore. From a confirmed city dweller, I was shocked and surprised and a little bit heartened to see that.
Yeah. I someone tweeted back at me that Updike said, there are people who live in New York and everyone else is just pretending or something along those lines. So that I really outed myself by doubting New York City. By the way, this is our Friday Quarantini. So this is sponsored, or you can barely see it, sponsored by, not really sponsored, drinking my Stella Artois to end a busy week of Zooms. I've been walking up and down the stairs countless times. Um, yeah, I mean, I think every New Yorker, I also wrote about this, that every New Yorker is going through this mental model now of what city life going to be in the future? How am I going to get around? Do I need to be in New York City and pay those rents? And I don't think it's just New York City. I think it's probably people who live in the city of San Francisco, Boston, maybe to a lesser extent, Los Angeles. Um, and I think it's a hard calculus at the moment. But I think what I've been hearing from some folks, particularly folks who are a little bit younger than me, but really my peer group as well, which is if in the future I don't need to be in the heart of the city more than a couple times a week, not only do I not need to live in the city, but do I really even need to live in a suburb, a classic suburb? Do I need to live in a Westchester suburb or New Jersey? Or should I really live in, I've been upstate for 8 weeks in an Airbnb, as I've shared before. And, will people migrate to Beacon and Hudson and Cold Spring and the towns up here, which are an hour and a half away, but very bucolic, very rural, on the premise that I can take a train and get into the city in an hour and a half, even if it's two, but I'm only doing it a few days a week. I think prior to COVID, my observation was like the creatives were already doing that, graphic artists and, consultants and folks like that who really didn't need to be in all the time. If everybody migrates to that sort of environment, working environment, I could imagine it becoming quite popular up here. I think I should start speculating on real estate up here, but why not have your, sort of more rural, acreage or kind of country, home, and then just come into the city and do it a couple days a week. And I can imagine that becoming it begs the question, do you need to be in a suburb? Do you need to be that close? And I think some people are kind of running through this calculus in real time.
Yeah, as somebody who lives in New Hampshire and commutes to Harvard Square most days, or did in the old world, it's a very doable thing, and there are some nice benefits like having a yard and seeing stars at night. One of the other interesting tweets you had this week was related to this, and you're basically taking the temperature of your followers on what would make them feel comfortable coming back to the office, right? And Facebook and Google have announced in the last couple of weeks that their employees have the freedom to work from home for the rest of the year. How do you see that? Like, the overall feeling seemed to be among your Twitter followers that it was not until a vaccine was ready that people would feel really comfortable. How do you see this playing out, and what do you see as a timeline for people coming back to the cities?
Yeah, I mean, like it's anyone's guess. My guess is no better than anyone else. But and I'm, you see the background that I have, which is the mural painted in our office in Soho, New York, and it is as close to that mural as I'm getting right now. So I miss the office, and this is sort of my way of still experiencing it or convincing others that I'm actually in the office when I'm not. But I think what's going to be tricky is everybody's going to make their own individual decision. There was a piece in the Atlantic about that today or yesterday that, we're moving to this moment where everyone's going to have to make individual choices about how to get places, what risks to take and whatnot. I can imagine when we do open up the office, we will give entrepreneurs their option to take a video meeting or come in. I don't want to pressure anybody, but I do miss being in the office, and I hope that maybe sometime in the fall or thereabouts, early winter, we do get back in. But the logistics, I think in Cambridge may be slightly easier because our Cambridge team, as you do, drive in. But Cambridge is also somewhat dense, and there are all sorts of questions about like getting into the building and the elevator and so forth. New York, that's magnified. I don't anticipate getting on the subway anytime soon, and you know, but the subway has been my main modality of transport for a decade, and so I know the conductors by the voice, and now and I'm not sure an Uber is any safer. So the thought of scooters goes through my head, bike parking. There's been a lot of talk about closing down some streets to help more outdoor dining and maybe commuting. So the logistics are tricky. In fact, we've gone back and forth from upstate to the city twice now. My kids have a doctor's appointment in a week and a half, and we're thinking through the logistics are complicated. We've got to get them to a doctor. We don't want to park in a garage. Those of you from New York know that all the garages in Manhattan are valet. So the minute you park your car, somebody gets in that car, that's risk. So it's all a question of what risks you're willing to take. And, I think we're going to slowly open up. I think there's pressure to get back into offices. I think fortunately venture and startups can do a lot remotely. And I think we will continue for the duration of the year. But I think some people are going to start to creep back, especially the smaller offices. Fortunately, in our New York office, you can take a stairwell. It's a very small building. But I think it's all case by case. And I don't want any entrepreneur to feel pressure to come in or feel at all disadvantaged by doing it over video. And the last thing I'd say to this point, we've done 3 investments in April and May, all via Zoom, all via video, without having met the founders previously.
Hashtag open for business.
Yes.
So,
but I don't like using that particular hashtag. But yes.
So, you talked about the advantages and disadvantages of these things. One of the interesting advantages and disadvantage conversations is how this is going to impact startup geography, right? Most of I think 80% of our investments historically have come from 4 cities: Boston, New York, San Francisco, and then Southern California more broadly. We've also invested in Nigeria and Korea and even exotic places like Winnipeg. But, does this
Mexico City, yeah.
Does this change your perspective on, does it make you more likely to take a pitch from a company that's based in Nashville or Columbus or some geography, or, Pittsburgh with Carnegie Mellon there? Some of these geographies that have great schools and talented populations, but don't necessarily, get onto a plane very frequently to get to New York to pitch people like you, or to San Francisco. Does it change the way you think about it? Does
Yeah,
I
think so. I mean, I think what will be interesting to see, it does for sure, because I think, Zoom in some ways is very equalizing. And so I have a Zoom meeting with somebody, with a company based in New York, and then another one based in Winnipeg or Madison or Tuscaloosa. It doesn't really matter. I think the question that I'll be looking for is, when companies start in the Zoom era, do they have that camaraderie and that, so much of a startup is the fabric of the founders. And I think if they haven't spent I think Zoom works. You and I have worked together for a long time. We know each other well. We've been together in many moments. And so doing things on Zoom is a continuation of an existing shared understanding and experience. I think founders still need that. I think I'm waiting for the day, and I don't know how I'll react to the founders that said, yeah, we met on Zoom or we met virtually. We've never been in the same place, but we started a company together. It's a little bit like saying, we just got married, but we've never met face to face. We haven't quite seen that yet. Maybe once. I don't think I've seen that. But I do think there's more openness to companies that are truly distributed than there ever have been before, and companies that are in places that aren't our typical geographies. So I think it's going to be really interesting. I also think a lot of our existing companies that have reached a certain scale are going to say, look, the employees can, I was on the phone with a CEO today, or with a founder today, who said, we're going to let our employees work wherever they want. And going forward, we'll keep a small office in New York, maybe a small office in the Bay or elsewhere. But coming to the office is no longer essential, and that productivity isn't down. In fact, in some cases, it's up with everybody working from home because they're not commuting and they're more efficient. So I think there's more openness to it. And I think, but I would say there's no substitute to meeting face-to-face. And I want to meet even every entrepreneur that we invest in during this COVID period. I want to meet face-to-face and sit down with and break bread, or, have a Stella or an overpriced coffee. Like, I think that is part of not just the overpriced coffee, but part of the venture relationship, founder VC relationship is a very human one, and not a transaction, which I think is harder to do when you're always virtual.
Right. And I think that makes a lot of sense. And one of the reasons, people will say that it's been hard to close deals outside of the Valley or outside of New York or Boston is because you don't have those in-person connections to the venture capitalists the way you might if you were in the startup scene in one of these big cities, right? What would help what would help startups stand out when they're pitching you if they're coming from a place where you don't have, a one-hop connection to that person, right? Are there more things you want to see in the virtual world in terms of social media profiles or GitHub profiles or something along those lines that would give you confidence to invest outside of the areas that we typically invest in? Or are there other sort of intangible things that you'd be paying more attention to in a world like this?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of it is going to be the diligence is going to be harder. We're going to do more diligence on referencing. I think, if we called 2 to 3 or 4 people in the past, we may call 6 to 8, to try to get a sense of the founder. I imagine we'll do more customer diligence when there are customers. I think we'll just try to go deeper into the business, even though it's a seed stage business, to the extent we can. And I think we'll spend more time on Zoom. I mean, I think that's, if I don't know if this is right, but if an in-person meeting is equal to 3 Zooms, we may be doing 9, 12, 15 Zooms, maybe divide it up. Joe, we'll rope you, as you have in the past, get roped into taking pitches and meeting founders and giving your opinion, and others on the team. I just think we're going to spend more time on Zoom and on the phone, and maybe we'll have some Zoom cocktail hours with prospective founders and Zoom lunches and more informal chats to try to replicate as much as we can of what we would do. I've always thought that like the 3rd or 4th meeting should be a lunch or coffee or something with a founder, because I want to get to know that person on a more personal level, and not just be about business. That's, our partner Dave has said something, which is, I let the chit chat happen on Zoom because it's lost without, the water cooler talk isn't getting done. And so when someone spends the first 10 minutes on Zoom kind of chit chatting about whatever, it's actually quite useful. It's part of the human sort of bonding. So I think it's still, again, I think we're going to do deals all over the country. I happened to do a deal pretty recently where the company's based in New York, but the founders are all in Europe at the moment. And I only met them on Zoom. And, I think the fact that they're in Europe at the moment is sort of irrelevant. And they're quite productive. And I feel like I'm really getting to know them, even though now they're a portfolio company and we're talking frequently. We had a call today. We haven't missed a beat.
Very cool. Any other thoughts on the world of geography or startups and how they fit into it?
Into geography?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I just think, I think everyone, I don't know about everyone, I think a lot of people are reevaluating geography, both on the micro personal level and on the business level, that a little bit of this view of if I'm going to be spending more time at home and I am not tethered to a given major metro, do I, and I don't know how this plays out. Like, if I've always wanted to live in the mountains, maybe now's my time to live in the mountains. Maybe I should go move to Colorado or, Idaho or whatever. But I think, but the flip side also says, the accessibility to a major metro, I think, is still desired. And I think one of the things I tweeted about was the college towns having a resurgence. And someone came and said, well, the colleges are all going to be bankrupt, which I'm not sure. It's maybe a bit of an exaggeration, but I think that the towns with some amount of density where I can get a good coffee and I could, find a small co-working shop and there's a good community of, interesting people without being in a massive city, I think are going to do quite well. And that's why Madison and Boise and Boulder and, actually, frankly, I think a lot of the towns in the Midwest that maybe people haven't spent as much time talking about, where, someone was tweeting about you could get, a house for $200,000 at or the equivalent of, a 1-bedroom in San Francisco is like this mansion in Indiana or something. I think those kind of towns are really going to do quite well. And maybe it's the reconciliation of the country we needed, where the coasts have been so inflated for so long that now finally, the kind of mid-sized city actually rises up again. And maybe there'll be a rationalization of rents and costs as well.
Yeah, it would be certainly very interesting. I was just looking back at a post we wrote a couple years now, and it was this post called 50 Companies That Got Big with Little or No Capital. And you realize like how much can be done with just human ingenuity and the entrepreneurial, focus on an idea and sort of getting something to market on a very inexpensive basis. And you have people who have more time on their hands who don't have to have, $1 million mortgage to provide a nice place for their family to live. And all of a sudden you can start to imagine there'd be a whole bunch of new, potentially fundable ideas coming down the pike before too long. So fingers
Well,
crossed.
and yeah, and there was always this view, at least I think of the last decade maybe, where a little bit of like it was too perfect of an economy in a way, meaning the rents were very high in the coastal metros, but the incomes were really high. So it was sort of this trade-off of like, well, I'll make a lot but I pay a lot, but like it washes out, and I could move to the center of the country but I'd make less and pay less, and then it becomes a wash. So if I want to be in New York to live because I want to be in New York or Boston or LA. But I think if these companies become more virtual and my income can be just as high, and salaries, very similar no matter where I live, then the calculus gets quite different. It's like, well, what if I don't have to be there and I still can get a reasonably good compensation, even if it's not quite the same? The algorithm gets starts to tip towards towards some of these other cities.
Yeah, there are going to be some pretty exceptional arbitrage opportunities for the next few years while this HR stuff gets figured out, right? Until companies figure out that they can pay people less in different parts of the country and sort of work out formulas for that. I think that's right. One thought that I've seen people talk about is, all this idea of virtualization is great and, it's helpful for workers. But do companies now actually have, does each individual employee actually have competition from, billions of people? Because if we can all work virtually, can you just get great coders from Nigeria or from India to work for your startup at a fraction of the cost, right? Do you think that's going to have any impact on the startup employee pool?
Yeah, I mean, I think this was people have said this, and I think it's true. This is just an acceleration of trends we were already seeing. One of the companies I'm on the board of, the tech team is in Turkey. I think we've just seen this for a while now, where development teams have been in, not just India, because there's historically been a lot in India. I think a lot of it is all over the world based on previous relationships, and so I think this has accelerated the process by which companies will hire from all over the world, and so I do think in some ways it's gotten more competitive. Having said that, I wonder if different skills are going to be valued. I think if maybe what works well as a good manager online may be very different than what works well as a good manager offline. Maybe politics and politicking is less valuable. But knowing how to deal remote, maybe introverts can relish this opportunity of being being really good at managing, distributed teams. I think it could change that. And, imagine a team lead who's, overseas managing a team in the state. Could be very interesting configurations.
Yeah, that's a big picture and a big idea. Maybe we can end with that.